This is Robert Stark. I am joined here with Jay Dyer at the Mercado Sagrado in Paramount Ranch in Agoura Hills, California. Jay's book is Esoteric Hollywood. Jay, great talking to you.
Thank you, Robert. Glad to be here.
Jay, tell us, our audience, how did you originally get interested in these themes? I remember when we interviewed, we talked on my podcast, The Stark Truth. You had a lot of these interest in films growing up in the 80s.
Right.
And when did you start to become more interested in the more esoteric themes involving symbolism?
Probably college era. So when I got into college, I was looking at espionage and psychological warfare, and originally separately from film, but then I read some pretty crazy books like Sinister Forces, and that kind of hit me to the idea that there was a connection between intelligence and movies. So then I decided at grad school you had to pick a thesis to do your master's thesis on. So I picked Ian Fleming and looking at how Ian Fleming, who was a high-level British intelligence guy, was using the Bond character to kind of portray real and fictional accounts of his own exploits and other spies as well. But there was also a lot of esoteric stuff that started tying into the Bond series. Like, he would name characters after esoteric ideas. He would use tarot card themes. For example, in Live and Let Die, voodoo comes into Live and Let Die. And then Crowley actually becomes a basis for several villains, not just Blofeld, but I think a couple other, if I recall, a couple other Bond villains have a Crowleyan aspect to them. So I started realizing, well, there's also like this esoteric occult side, there's also this intelligence side, films, and they all kind of interact. And just the more that I read, the more I saw that these three worlds that seem different to most people are actually really interconnected.
So you came to LA and you've lived in LA before, this region. Are there any significant esoteric sites in LA in particular?
That's a great question. There are quite a few. I mean, like the whole state, in my view, is kind of a military-industrial complex state. I mean, my dad was in the Navy, so we were stationed when I was a kid at the base in San Diego. But I didn't realize then that there's like Navy SEALs, there's Camp Pendleton, there's all the way up the coast. It's just like basically nothing but naval research. And actually, in terms of intelligence stuff, a lot of the really secret, high-tech stuff is Navy. So not even like, they'll produce stuff that maybe the CIA will use 10, 20 years later. So my dad, when he was just an enlisted guy, but I didn't realize it at the time, but he was talking about directed energy weapons. He was talking about Tesla type tech that was on his naval vessel back in the 80s. So in the regard to like the secret tech, there's that whole side of it. In regard to like the esoteric stuff, I mean, yeah, I would say that you have the Catholic founding, obviously, which is interesting to California, but there's a huge Freemasonic element to California too. Like a lot of the downtown LA area buildings are Masonically, structured in terms of architecture.
Can you give some particular examples?
There's a big bank in downtown LA that is specifically Masonic.
The bank tower? The skyscraper?
That sounds right. I'm trying to remember. My buddy did a Occult podcast just on Masonic structures in LA. The Griffith Observatory is a great example.
Oh yeah.
It's nothing but like Rosicrucian, Copernican, but Copernicus was into Rosicrucian esoteric stuff. And then if you go in, you'll see like Plato and Pythagoras are kind of like painted up on it's almost like a secular esoteric cathedral in a way, if you've ever been inside there.
Yeah. Well, the thing about a lot of those structures, a lot of them are aesthetically pleasing.
Right.
So with the kind of role that aesthetics play is there's kind of this aspect of aesthetics as occult symbolism. What is the role of aesthetics? I guess you could say architecture too, but particularly in film, using aesthetics, visual imagery, and music as special effects, and creating this atmosphere, and how does that impact the human psyche?
It's about capturing the imagination, right? So I mentioned Gregory Bateson in the talk. Bateson has a whole book on how to capture human imagination, and he's part of MK Ultra. Disneyland, when Disney talks about, what do they say? They're like the crafters of imagination. Or so. They use imagination as sort of their tagline. And that's because they are specifically the sort of the Pentagon, DARPA aspect of controlling the youth. Disney is really the test bed for that. The CIA actually helped Walt Disney get the land to set up Disneyland, and it has its own constitution and all that. But the arts are a way to portray what's in your subconscious, what's in your inner world, your inner psychological associations, and to project them out into the external world and to influence people in the external world. That's what the arts do. So in that way, it's a craft, so to speak. And it uses all the mediums, right? Sight, sound, all the senses are involved in the arts. And that's where the esoteric can come into play, because you have, for example, in the esoteric world, the idea of something like color magic, which sounds strange, but a lot of, for example, police departments or psychological warfare, they'll study the usage of color and how color affects the psyche or the subconscious in order to craft anything. Like sometimes they'll paint interrogation rooms a certain color to calm people, right? That's essentially the same idea as color magic, right? Using colors to create or cast a spell or create a certain effect in the audience. So that's one way but I mean, sound is the exact same thing. Like we were talking earlier about sounds cause effects because they're waves. We are basically receptors, like we're basically tuning forks that receive all of these vibrations. Not to sound too new agey, but that's actually true. And those vibrations can affect us. That's how it comes into play with like ELF, VLF, and Brzezinski in his books. He talks about using different frequencies of waves to control people. Michael Aquino talks about this in his books. So there's absolutely a direct connection between the arts and the esoteric.
With films and music you enjoyed growing up, when you study the occult aspects and attributes, does that taint your enjoyment of that work? Are you able to kind of separate the two?
That's an interesting question. I try to take a pretty objective stance, or as objective as is possible. So no, it doesn't really taint my take on it, because I can see it for what it is. Like, I might not agree with transcendental meditation, but I can appreciate the different layers and aspects of a Lynch film or David Lynch's work without necessarily being into Zen Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism or any of those Far Eastern philosophies. I can still appreciate it for what it is. So no, not necessarily. I mean, unless I find it just like too disgusting or degenerate. I'm trying to remember. I was watching something that I like even Hereditary. I don't know if you saw Hereditary, but
I heard it was good. I'm gonna check it out. Is it a little satanic, or?
Well, it was like really hardcore ceremonial magic. But
Kenneth Anger is probably someone that you might be a little if you're on.
I watch Kenneth Anger stuff, and I don't.
A lot of it feels like more direct.
It last night.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy some of his work, but there's a mixed thing there, because a lot of Kenneth Anger in particular does deal kind of directly with what feels like, what would be called satanic, at least, regardless of whether or not you believe in that.
But actually, there's an aspect to which you could still learn from that, because if you watch something like Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome, you're seeing his vantage point of what he sees the 20th century in Hollywood bringing.
Yeah, no,
Hollywood is bringing the Pleasure Dome, which is part of the new satanic aeon.
Yeah, and it's interesting in his work how you see you're talking about like the dialectics. I mean, his work will feature swastikas and stuff like that, but also he's very tied in with the hippie movement. So you really see the kind of meta dialectic there in an interesting way. So I've always appreciated his work, but I've also I do think it has a certain power, not to sound too hokey, but if you watch it, yeah.
What do you think about the idea or concept that there are these filmmakers within Hollywood? Lynch is obviously, David Lynch is a name that's put out. You could also make the case with Stanley Kubrick and Eyes Wide Shut, who are working within Hollywood and working subversively and giving out clues.
Yeah, it's always hard to tell exactly what people's motives are, but I mean, I remember back in the 90s when Lost Highway came out and it didn't do well in the box office. A movie like that would never come out in the box office now. But even then they were saying that was David Lynch's middle finger to Hollywood, which I would say that's probably true.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so bizarre, so I guess genuinely avant-garde. and even the new season of Twin Peaks. I mean, I think partly the reason why it didn't get made, or almost didn't get made for so long, was because they probably saw it as too bizarre. I mean, that's what they said about the show that we did, is it was too much, too bizarre, too cerebral, all that stuff. Too weird, using too many words nobody knows about. So, yes, I think some of the directors, even ones that get to a certain level who had to compromise to get to that level, Kubrick definitely did because of working with NASA and all that. I think he still wanted to be an artist, do his own thing. It comes at a price. So I think if you're willing to pay that price, then you become an outsider and you don't get the commercial gigs.
But some people like Kubrick and Lynch find a really interesting balance
They
there.
do find a balance.
Yeah, and they're kind of I don't know, I definitely look to them as people who have kind of infiltrated the elite and are putting something more positive, I think, or just more interesting and better out there.
Yeah. At least interesting, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about your film project?
I know you're limited in what you can tell us, but
The new one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, Hollywood Dakota I thought was a great model, a great idea, but of course it wasn't renewed. So there's not going to be a season 2 of that. But other people reached out and with different ideas for maybe a more broad approach to not just looking at movies, but also other aspects of culture, right? So rock and roll, fashion, all that, as well as Hollywood. And I think you have to, because people who were esotericists weren't just interested in Hollywood; they're also interested in the rock scene, the music scene. It all ties in. You have to look at all of it. So I think it's actually a better, stronger idea. So that's kind of what it's going for. But I don't think I can say much more than that. So hopefully it'll get picked up. It's going to be pitched to some bigger networks.
it's just become very, very clear to me that there really is an agenda, that they actually will talk about this directly. It's like, oh, how are we going to reach middle America? How are we going to reach the sandwich guy in Podunk, Arkansas? And how are we going to make him more liberal? Is basically, it's very open discussion. So I just wanted to share that because
it's interesting to hear that it's sort of openly discussed, because I don't spend a whole lot of time in like production crews or around the kind of circles that you would be talking about. So a lot of what I do is look at like white papers and establishment people's books and documents themselves, just to see what they say. That's kind of what I try to do in the Globalist book series, the lectures that I do, is look at their works, see what they say, try to digest that into nuggets that people can take. But there's no question that's it's not just about money. In other words, it's not just how do we make our show popular with big audiences and ratings and all that. It's also social engineering, and that's because, and it just came out, this will be in my second book, that it wasn't just people initially thought that in the last few years through FOIA requests that the Pentagon and the CIA and these different entities had put money into 200, 300 productions. It's not. It's thousands.
Yeah.
Going back forever.
And into the networks, I'm sure. Yeah.
So and it's not just there's also private companies that want messages put into film.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of agendas at work, but yes, it is ultimately social engineering. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll just throw it out there. My impression with the people I work with, it's not super conscious on their part. They're just the writers. They just have this worldview, and it all works. I guess what you were kind of saying earlier. Maybe certain entities set things in motion, but then it does kind of work organically after that. From my perspective, that's what it seems to do. I mean, these are just upper class liberals in LA, and this is their worldview they have, and they really see it as a moral mission to propagandize. Right. Yeah. So cool. That was that question. Then we have a few more if you're still around. Just because we're in LA, and because I'm actually going to restart the camera real quick. Yeah, just since we're in LA, I thought I'd ask about Charles Manson. What are some of the chief theories you might subscribe to with regards to that case? Was Manson being handled by a higher cult, perhaps related to the Process Church? And I guess also, the more I look into it, the more it's was Tate's murder, was that a ritual sacrifice?
Yeah, I think that there's basically two ideas here, that it's either a drug mob hit, and there is a mob connection to the circles that Manson was in, or was it a ritual murder? And it could be both. I mean, and if it's the ritual murder angle, a lot of writers think that, if you read Maury Terry or Peter Levenda, they argue that it was not just about that event, but also making that a big ritual murder for the alteration of America. So that it was actually a ritual murder that, like JFK, like RFK, like MLK, these events, these assassinations had nationwide psychological warfare.
To change the culture,
yes,
in other words.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think you could see the Manson murders having that impact.
Absolutely. I mean, it
That
ended
is-
the 60s and brought us into the 70s in some very,
And I think it
very real
shows that
sense.
there is, like Dave writes in his book, Where Sees Stuff Can, there is a dark side to the hippie stuff.
Oh,
it's not just free love crap. There's also this sort of consciously satanic element to it.
that Kenneth Anger captures so well. And of course,
He did.
Kenneth Anger, I heard you talking about this recently, Kenneth Anger had some connections to Tate and to Anton LaVey and to Bobby Beausoleil, of course. And so some of those connections are interesting. If you look at someone like Roman Polanski, who was Tate's husband, but also, and a
Right,
pedophile. And made Rosemary's Baby. So it's like, why are all these ideas of Satanism and sacrifice clustered together around this set of people?
Well, and she played roles, esoteric. She plays a witch. I think she claimed to actually be a witch at one point in real life. She comes from a military intelligence family, Tate that is. She played that kind of role in Eye of the Devil. So it's definitely there. Now, actually demonstrating this, I think you can look at hard evidence between the connection between the Process Church and British intelligence, because the Process Church interviewed Savile, they interviewed Mick Jagger, pretty famous people, as well as Manson. I do think that's who's in the background. They do have a British intelligence connection. That's what's most likely as to who might be the higher level cult. And then authors like Maury Terry and Ultimate Evil, he speculated that there might have also been a connection to Son of Sam, that Son of Sam murders, that there's the same kind of people in the background. I think that's plausible.
Yeah. Have you been to Spawn Ranch?
I've not.
Yeah. You're in LA.
At one time a movie set, right?
Yeah, it looks pretty much exactly like this, and probably back in the 60s it would have had structures like this. It all burned down in the 70s. But yeah, I have been. It's interesting. It's not really marked out in any way. Pretty nearby. But yeah.
So, but then there is that mob angle too, which I think could be involved with drugs and hit. And there's rumors of people like Peter Sellers and pretty big name actors, having like pornographic type films that were made of them.
And of course, Peter Sellers was in Lolita, like Kubrick. So.
There's rumors that might have been involved in part of what was going on and covering things up.
Yeah.
Why people had to be killed.
Interesting. Wow.
One thing I find ironic with the theme of Crowley is that you see this kind of interesting dichotomy where both figures within the establishment and Hollywood elite are fascinated with Crowley, but he's also a lot of avant-garde counterculture, not so much the mainstream counterculture, but a lot of the more dissident counterculture figures. Matt, can you think of some good examples?
Of people that are interested in him?
A lot of...
Kenneth Anger is probably the most clear example. Really just... the folks at Countercurrents, that website, tend to have like James O'Mara.
Oh, yeah.
People from
political dissidents are fascinated with him as
both
well,
people from the dissident right and the dissident left are fascinated by Crowley. He's
and
kind of a meta-dialectical figure in that sense.
As well as people like Dennis Hopper and Dean Stockwell.
Oh, and Ozzy Osbourne and rock and rollers, Manson, Marilyn Manson.
How does Crowley relate to those two themes? Why is there such an appeal by both people within the more what you would call the inner circle, and then these kind of dissident outsiders?
Good question. I would say that because from the vantage point of those who are social controllers, technocrats, social engineers, like I was speaking about in the talk of a left and a right, I would say that because Crowley thought that we were entering a new aeon, and essentially all the people who claim to be a magus, whether it be Anton LaVey or Michael Aquino, they all thought that this was some special period of a new aeon, a new age of some kind. And so I think that if you are a social engineer, anybody who's promoting the idea of a completely new way of doing things, of viewing the world, of establishing the world, of a cleansing of the world. I mean, it's kind of apocalypticism. There's that apocalyptic element to Crowley and a lot of the cults. Whether it's Manson or the Babylon working and that kind of stuff. The idea is that we're going to usher in this new age. So I think that from the power structure standpoint, they see that as useful, whether they believe it or not.
Yeah, that's ironic because that same theme of reinventing the world can exist within both the establishment and anti-establishment.
Both kind of tap into what I guess the word I'm using today is like meta-dialectical kind of intellectual spaces, which, I mean, what we're doing right here is kind of that because we're at a hippie fair and we're talking about this stuff. So that's kind of cool. And I think that's what you do a lot with your podcast, Robert, is try to find that. It's not even so much finding common ground. I mean, that's the kind of flowery way of saying it, but it's also just like getting beyond the bullshit and just like taking as close to like a kind of objective view of culture like as you can, and you find that there are these common threads that are made to appear opposites by whomever, whether it's mainstream media, globalistly, whatever you want to say, and that there's actually a lot of common ground. And even where there's not common ground, there's at least a lot of space for conversation that doesn't involve like fist fighting.
Robert Anton Wilson makes that very point in his books. If you read Lucifer Rising or the other ones, he says exactly what you just said in that, right?
So it's an interesting kind of energy that you can tap into. But I mean, this is pretty much a hippie fair. So how did you get this gig?
One of the people that puts it on, her name is Heather. She is a longtime reader of my site.
Yeah.
She is friends with Sean Stone too, and she had Sean Stone come, I think, last year to speak.
Gotcha.
And I know Sean. I've been on his show a few times. And then he spoke last year, and then she asked me to come this year. So.
I see. Are there any other events or talks that you're planning on attending today that you'd recommend, or mostly just?
I don't know a whole lot about this event. I know there's a lot of musicians that sounded pretty neat, but I had a whole bunch of stuff to do while I was up here. So I did an RT interview, and I did an audition.
Oh yeah. Nice. Any other questions, Robert?
They got it.
Okay, cool. So remind us where we can find you on the web, and is there anything else you'd like to add?
No. You can go to jasonanalysis.com. All my essays and articles are there. You can subscribe there. My YouTube channel as well, Jay Dyer. And the second book, Esoteric Hollywood 2, is complete. It'll be out December, and then hopefully we'll have a new TV show as well.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jay Dyer.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Robert.
Thank you.